The night I saw her again, I almost walked out of the bar before she could see me. Not because I was afraid of her, but because 12 years earlier, she had been the girl who gave me my first kiss, and I had spent most of those years convincing myself that memory no longer mattered. Then she looked across the crowded room, froze, and recognized me. Her eyes filled with the kind of surprise that makes the past feel suddenly alive, and when she finally reached my table, she smiled through tears and asked for one more chance to finish the goodbye we never got to have. If you believe that kindness, hope, forgiveness, compassion, and second chances can change a person's life, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the person we thought we lost forever is simply waiting for the right moment to remind us who we used to be. My name is Caleb, and I was 31 when that evening happened in a quiet bar outside Nashville, Tennessee. I wasn't there looking for romance. I had recently moved back to the city after spending years working in different states, trying to build a career and escape the feeling that my life had become a collection of unfinished sentences. My father, George, had passed away the previous winter, and his death had forced me to return home and sort through the house where I had grown up. Every room seemed to hold an old version of me, including the awkward 19-year-old who had once believed that love could last simply because it felt powerful enough. Her name was Hannah. We had met at a small church fundraiser when we were teenagers, became close friends, and eventually developed feelings neither of us knew how to explain. She was thoughtful, stubborn, funny, and somehow always noticed when someone was hurting even if they tried to hide it. One summer evening, after we had spent hours walking through the town fair, she kissed me beneath a string of yellow lights. It was my first kiss. It was also hers. We were young enough to believe that firsts were promises. But life had other plans. Hannah's family suddenly moved to another state after her mother accepted a new job, and everything happened so quickly that our goodbye was little more than a rushed embrace at a bus station. We promised to keep in touch. We didn't. Letters became occasional messages, messages became silence, and eventually years passed. I heard through an old friend that Hannah had built a life somewhere in Colorado. I assumed she had married, forgotten me, and moved forward. That was why seeing her in that bar felt impossible. She looked older, of course, but not unfamiliar. Her hair was shorter, her face carried a few gentle lines around her eyes, and there was something different in the way she stood, as if life had taught her to carry both joy and sadness at the same time. She recognized me almost immediately. She walked toward my table slowly, almost as though she was afraid I might disappear if she moved too quickly. What I learned that night was that Hannah hadn't forgotten me either. She had returned to Tennessee to care for her grandmother, who was recovering from a long illness, and she had been living in Colorado only temporarily. She had never married. She had spent years believing she had made peace with losing the person who had known her before adulthood had changed everything. Then she told me why she had approached me. She remembered our first kiss. Not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. We had both been nervous. We had laughed afterward. I had accidentally stepped on her shoe. She had teased me for turning bright red. Yet in her memory, that awkward little moment represented something bigger, a time when both of us were innocent enough to believe that being seen by another person could be enough. She looked at me and asked if I ever wondered what would have happened if we had stayed in each other's lives. For the first time in years, I admitted the truth. I had wondered more often than I wanted to confess. But we didn't rush into romance. We spent the next few weeks meeting for coffee, walking through familiar streets, talking about our families, our mistakes, our disappointments, and the dreams we had abandoned along the way. I discovered that Hannah had become a nurse because of something her grandmother had taught her. People don't always need someone to fix their lives, sometimes they simply need someone willing to stay beside them. That lesson changed me. I had spent years running from grief, from disappointment, and from the fear that caring deeply meant eventually losing something. Hannah never tried to convince me that life wouldn't hurt again. Instead, she showed me that pain wasn't proof that love had been a mistake. One rainy evening, months after our reunion, we returned to the same little town fair where our story had begun. The lights were different, the rides had changed, and neither of us was 19 anymore. We stood beneath a row of warm bulbs while the music drifted through the night. She reached for my hand. There was no dramatic promise, no perfect speech, and no attempt to recreate the past. We simply stood there, older and wiser, grateful that life had given us another opportunity to meet as the people we had become. Then Hannah smiled and reminded me that our first kiss had been terrible. I laughed so hard that tears came to my eyes. And when she leaned closer, I realized she wasn't asking me to return to the past. She was asking me to step into a future I had once been too afraid to imagine. This time, our kiss wasn't a beginning filled with teenage promises. It was a quiet choice between two adults who had learned that some people don't come back to give you the life you lost. They come back to show you that your heart is still capable of beginning again. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to support the video with a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe if you want more stories about hope, healing, and the unexpected ways life brings people together. And before the story ends, leave a comment telling me this: do you believe some people are meant to find their way back into our lives when we're finally ready to understand why we lost them in the first place? That night, as Hannah and I walked beneath the lights, I finally understood something my younger self could never have known. Sometimes the most important people in our lives don't arrive at the perfect time. Sometimes they leave, grow, struggle, and become strangers for a while. But if love was real, even in its smallest form, the memory can remain quietly waiting. And sometimes, years later, when neither person is looking for it, life opens the door again. Not to repeat the past, but to give the future a chance.